So yeah, one of the one standard definitions is the use of immediately effective acts such as strikes, demonstrations, or sabotage to achieve a political or social end. This isn't quite right though. Direct action doesn't always have to have an immediate effect, especially on a campaign level. Individual actions are part of a wider thing, as we'll sort of touch on a bit later. So they're not necessarily immediate, and the effect of them is not that straightforward. So it's a bit more complicated than that. But for now, the key points in this definition are effective and to achieve a political social end. So they're effective actions and to achieve a political or social end. That said, it's important to note that direct action is not always necessarily non-violent. Direct action can include activities and actions targeting people, groups, institutions, or property, but these actions could be non-violent or they could be violent. So examples of non-violent direct action may include things like peaceful civil disobedience, sit-ins, strikes, and counter-economics, whereas violent direct actions may include things like physical assault, arson, or even just the threat of future violence. I just want to stress to everyone on this call that Youth Demand and Just Stop Oil are 100% committed to non-violence. So we'll only look at non-violent examples today. Next slide, please. So I kind of want to, oh no, yeah, just what is not violent direct action? Yeah, the one before. um, I just wanted to throw it out to the people here actually, and just what do you think non-violent direct action means, and what sort of how how do you define it? Because that's just one definition I've given. Has anyone got any thoughts on what other things non-violent direct action could be? What some of the main characteristics it could have? Yeah, boycotts are in the chat. If anyone wants to raise their hand, they can actually speak if they want. Yeah, not physically harming anybody, threatening or menacing. Yeah, it's definitely the non-violence and confrontational. That's a very good one. Yeah, there's some examples of types of non direct actions. Gaining attention and visibility, stopping business as usual. Yeah, we've got some really good points there. Disruptive, provocative. But yeah, so I've got a kind of list of things as well, and some of them have come up already. But so it could be things like it's kind of what is the difference between a direct action and signing a petition, and what's the difference between throwing paint on the window of a building and assaulting the CEO of a company, which is clearly a violent direct action rather than a non-violent one. So it's important to say that direct action is an action taken to achieve a specific goal. And these are direct, often physical actions rather than negotiations or discussions alone. They are peaceful. There's no use of violence, either physical or emotional. But non-violence is, of course, a spectrum. There's no crystal clear definition. It's really up to an individual where they see acts of violence. But one of the most important things is it's an active stance. There's a difference between being non-violent, not being violent, and being violent. And the idea of non-violent direct action, it's asking specifically forcefully for something and creating tension and creating a disruption. It's instigates a conflict, essentially, but it's a non-violent conflict. Just want to give you one small example, which is from my personal life. I used to live in a shared house with this person called Gary, a friend of mine, with some other people as well. And we moved house together, and we each took responsibility for a different bill to pay, basically. And from the previous property we lived in together, there was money owed on the council tax bill. So I knew we could claim back £100 because we previously overpaid some. So he had charge of getting that money back and paying the council tax. But I knew he was very bad at admin, and he basically came to me saying, "Oh, you've got to pay your council tax this month. Here's what's your contribution." And I basically refused to pay it until he claimed back the money that we were owed by the council. So my own little act of civil disobedience, and basically he was he was very angry about that. I basically instigated a conflict with him, and he didn't speak to me for a couple of weeks after that. But he did claim the money back from the council, and then things were back to fine again. So my small act of disobedience by withholding my council tax amount has actually worked quite well. So anyone else in a shared accommodation, that's a tactic you can potentially use. So I'm going to pass over to Olive now for the next section.
Thanks very much, Paul. Um, well, yeah, firstly, hello, I'm Olive. I've been involved with both Just Stop Oil and Youth Demand, and I've been involved with loads of different actions over the past 2 years with both of those campaigns. Um, so I'm going to start with looking at getting into the theory of like what are some of the principles of successful non-violent direct action campaigns. And there's three crucial elements are the main points. So there's disruption, sacrifice, and escalation. And we'll get into breaking down each of those, looking at a few more. But these are elements that are really, really crucial for creating change because together they create dilemmas for those in power. I'm not saying that if you have all of these three, you're guaranteed success, but on the whole, it's a pretty safe bet that if you don't have all three, you're guaranteed to have failure. Obviously, what I'm going to go through, there's so much more out there. There's loads of resources if you're really interested in learning more. And I'm going to highlight a book recommendation that if you've been coming to lots of this training series, you will have heard loads of. But This is an Uprising by Mark and Paul Engler. It's a really brilliant resource, which also will help you better understand all the things I'm saying. So this is kind of the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, if you want to learn more, that's a great recommendation. So, non-violent direct action has been used loads in the past throughout history, and it's a tactic for when everything else has failed. When voting, writing to politicians, signing petitions, marches, all these things, when they're not working, they can't achieve change because the system is broken. When you have that, people are able to use non-violent direct action to confront the people in power and to win demands to achieve their goals. And part of what is beautiful about non-violence is that it can come in so many different forms. It looks different in loads of different contexts in terms of the time, the country, different levels of privilege or oppression, and can range from huge mass mobilization to small groups of very brave people all achieving different goals. A few things about non-violence. So non-violence is really crucial if you're trying to build a mass movement. So where people from all across society can be a part of that. If you look at historical examples, at the studies on this, violent actions statistically skew way harder towards young men. And if you want like a variety of genders, if you want older people, families to all be part of this, non-violence is more accessible and more welcoming to a much broader sweep of society. So you tend to get a much greater variety of people being part of it. It's something that can bring people together. And the ability for people to see loads of different people involved in action is super important because action itself is what leads to more direct action. So action is mobilization. There's kind of a snowball effect. People see something that they like, and it's something they can imagine themselves taking part in, then your movement can grow. So one example of this from like our experiences is Just Stop Oil at one point did a long action phase of slow marching, which was something which was less of like a high stakes action than they'd done previously. But lots of people have experience going on kind of standard marches in the road. Although those were different, it was much greater periods, groups of people. It was less disruptive, but it was something that people could see themselves doing slightly more. They could think, I could do that. And then those actions help to mobilize people for larger ones going forwards. Um, Another really key thing about nonviolence is that it is about exposing the violence of the state. So nonviolence is designed and is effective at meeting violence from the state. Nonviolence doesn't fail when it meets with violence. It is designed for that confrontation. Because it can cause what we call the backfire effect. So when non-violent protesters are met with repression from the state, it can trigger outrage in the population against the regime because they've highlighted the oppressive situations that you're living in and the overreach of the state, and also cause a huge surge in sympathy with the movement, with the people in resistance. And so what you see is that actually in historical instances where you expect repression against the resistors to actually cause like the end or a shrinking of the movement, often that is the point where actually the movement explodes and there's a massive growth as people are moved into outrage and into sympathy, and they actually get involved in resistance rather than it frightening people away. So these principles on that I spoke about earlier was looking at kind of a campaign level. I'm going to zoom in a little bit closer and look at what are the principles on the level of each action design. I'm going to go through a few of these, and a lot of actions will take some of these elements, some will take all, some will have a heavier focus on others, and that's okay for an action to be a good action, a successful action. It's probably not going to have all of these, but what's really important is thinking, okay, which apply to which action or which are the most important in what scenario to achieve the desired outcome. So I'm going to run through these, and then we're going to do an exercise where we're going to go through some specific historical or modern examples, and people we will ask people to put their hands up and give an example of which of these principles they think are relevant to this exercise. So bear that in mind as I'm going through them. So to start, perhaps the most obvious is disruption, causing disruption. Breaking this down into three different elements, there's economic disruption, public disruption, and psychological disruption. So you use this disruption to create pressure on those in power. They generate media attention, they generate publicity, and with that comes scrutiny, scrutiny on the government to the issue that you are speaking to, that you are demanding. Economic disruption has to be sustained and heavy to win demands. But public disruption can often get more press attention, so it pushes your narrative even further into the media. It creates, national discourse around the issues you are trying to generate attention on, and it also often creates more human interactions and can humanize the movement. And that element of social conflict is also something which generates attention and an emotional reaction to what you are doing, which can be really important for actually hooking people in to issues that otherwise they're not connecting with on a day-to-day basis. Second principle is sacrifice. So when people see others putting themselves through really difficult experiences, through hard times, through arrest, through court cases, often even through prison, this shows commitment, it shows vulnerability, it shows humanity. And it hugely contributes to what I described of the backfire effect, where people are emotionally moved to join the movement or just to support it. So it both can cause an increase in mobilization in people who are actually getting involved with the resistance and with people who sympathize and are passive supporters of the demands that you're calling for. Escalation is a really important point. This is more on a campaign level, but you think about it with a series of actions. So increasing the pressure as you go on those in power. And this could be through the type of action. For example, moving from drawing with chalk to spraying with removable paint to moving to smashing windows. So this is an escalation of the tactics that turns up the pressure as you go. But it could also be an increase in the number of people. Novelty is another factor to bear in mind. So designing an action which is outrageous. This obviously has been a speciality of Just Stop Oil, unexpected, wacky actions that can go viral. So these create publicity, which again, all the things I've said is important for boosting the campaign and getting a national debate around the issues that you are trying to set an agenda on. But it also is really important for fundraising, for getting donors that mean that you can continue your campaign, you can continue to fund powerful actions, mobilization, and obviously getting national attention on the movement can cause massive spikes in mobilization in numbers of signups. Yeah, and these kind of actions, which are unexpected, can have a polarizing effect, which is where because they cause a strong emotional reaction to people, if it's untraditional forms of protest, it means that people have to engage with that, with the movement, with the resistance, with what is the right proportional kind of action we should be taking. And it often forces people to pick a side. If you do something drastic, and it's like people have to pick, are they with you or are they against you? And it can move a lot of people who were passively sitting in the middle, it can move them into active support, especially when they see the way often people can blow out of proportion things like, yeah, but we'll get into some of the actual actions and then you can apply what you think to that. Accountability. So this is when people claim the actions that they did. And it's about being upfront and honest as a campaign, as individuals, about what you've done. And it means you can be upfront about why you did it. This is really important in humanizing, in normalizing the people who have taken the action to the public. It means that instead of being perceived as sort of like scary ghost figures who do a thing and then disappear, you are able to come across as often more relatable. If people can see the face of the person who did it, can hear them speaking themselves in their voice about why they did it, and it creates this emotional connection. It also usually really increases press engagement because they're interested in that human personal story. And also because it means that people can give direct quotes. And it also makes it easier for the people in power to negotiate with you or to open up a dialogue, which ultimately is really important and not lose sight of what are you trying to achieve. If you're trying to open a dialogue to win demands with people in power, you need them you're trying to push them towards feelings that they want to actually talk to you. Obviously, not all non-violent direct action is accountable. There is a lot that isn't. But tactically, for what we are trying to achieve, for what our campaign is trying to achieve, it is the most strategic option. And the last principle here is about embodying the world that we want to see within our actions. This is not something which all actions obviously include, but within action designs, you can sometimes create a space which shows the kind of relationships or world or spaces that you're trying to create and show your opposition to the world around you. Actions can be really powerful in painting an image of a positive future to inspire people, to show them really clearly what you're actually fighting for. So, with um, all of those in the back of your mind, we're going to run through a few examples. And Paul is going to kick us off here. But yeah, after each one, we will invite people. Yeah, please put your hand up, jump in, and there aren't really any wrong answers here. It's which of these you think are significant pointers. I'm going to type them in the chat as Paul is going through the first one, so you can actually see them as well. Yeah, Paul, if you want to give the
Yeah,
first
thanks,
example.
Olive. Yeah, thanks, Olive. So this first one is, yeah, you can either put your hand up in the main meeting or you can sort of write something in the chat about these different elements. The first one is the lunch counter sittings were part of the civil rights movement in the United States. Black people sat in segregated lunch counters, sat calmly and peacefully and waited to be served in a place where they traditionally would not be allowed to sit down and eat their lunch. They came back day after day and grew in numbers. So obviously it would help if you had a little bit of knowledge about this, but what sort of elements of the elements we've seen does this sort of action tick of just actually sitting in a lunch counter? Anyone got any thoughts on that? Yeah, does create a dilemma, which all good actions do. Embodies the world they want to see because this is exactly what they want to be able to do. Yeah, disruption, of course. Jazz, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I was gonna say the initial thing that stood out to me was embodying the world they want to see because it's like a really kind of simple way of showing that just sitting down, wanting to live in like a non-segregated world where they can eat in like with their white counterparts and yeah, and also I think the kind of escalatory aspect to it as well because like more people joined as they kind of continued the same action. So that kind of shows the escalatory elements to it as well.
Yeah, really great that you picked up on that actually, because I've tried to pick out these actions that sort of really embody one particular thing. I mean, a lot of them have lots of them. There's definitely lots of sacrifice here. They were very badly treated. There weren't actually many of them arrested in this case, but they were beaten up by the white people that frequented those cafes. But with escalation, this is a really big one for escalation. Four people just in Greensboro, where it started. Four people did it on day one, and by day six, they had 1,000 people, and they completely shut down the place. It was a very, very rapid mobilization, a rapid escalation. So this is a really good example of escalation. But yes, of course, it ticks a lot of the other boxes as well. I'll pass on back to Olive for the next example.
Thanks. So our next one is the Seeds of Hope action. So in 1996, three women broke into the Wharton Aerodrome, which is near Preston, and they caused over £1 million worth of damage to a BAE Hawk aircraft, which was going to be sold to the Indonesian military to be used in their genocide against occupied East Timor. Yeah, so any thoughts on which of the principles? Sacrifice, yep, economic disruption, that's a big one. Obviously, they caused a huge cost of damage. Any other ideas? Novelty, yeah. If anyone wants to speak, if you use the little hand signal thing, because I can't see everyone. Yeah, accountability. So this actually, they were completely accountable in this action, and they actually phoned security themselves because no one was turning up to come and get them. Yeah, putting their bodies on the line. Sacrifice. Yeah, these are all really great ones. There's a lot of different ones in here. Yeah, disruption again. Um, yeah, embodying the world we want to see. Maybe not initially what you think of with this one, but they were going out and disabling aircraft. They wanted to see a world where that didn't happen, a world without genocide, and so they went out and made that happen. Yeah. Okay. I think we'll pass back to Paul for the next section.
Yeah, sorry, I've got the video off now because it was just a bit unstable. So, um, yeah, next one is the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong from 2014 onwards, sort of led by students. Lots of civil society got on board in an umbrella kind of coalition. It was called the Umbrella Protest because they started using umbrellas against the tear gas that was fired at them, and they used methods to make that less bad for them. But basically, they were just mass street occupations. They occupied like several areas of the city for a long time. So, what sort of elements do you think that has? Yeah, disruption. It's a really good example of public disruption. There were major roads and they occupied them and blocked them for 77 days in some cases. Um, I'm not sure about novelty actually for this because it was just a standard street demonstration. And these kind of things had potentially been done before. Probably not in Hong Kong. It probably was a novelty in Hong Kong because it really activated up to 100,000 people and beyond. Um, any other elements that people would like to sort of throw in the mix? I mean, one interesting one on this is talking about um, embodying the world we want to see. It was actually based on the results of a referendum. So they did polls basically. They did some quite fairly accurate polls, and people wanted the democratic changes that the campaign was campaigning for. So in a way, it was embodying democracy in itself by actually people going out there and actually fighting for that democracy. Um, but yeah, definitely sacrifice. It was certainly peaceful. Yeah, Joshua Wong now, unfortunately, he's still in jail in Hong Kong, one of the key instigators of these protests, and he's just been charged with something extra on top. So they're really trying to keep that campaign down. Yeah. Um, Back to Olive for the next example.
Thanks. So, our next example is sports disruption. So, three of the images there are just before elections. You've got the disruption of Wimbledon, of snooker games, and we're just up oil targeted football pitches. And so, I managed to lock on. And then we also have the youth demand disruption of the London Marathon recently, where they jumped onto the course in front of the professional male runners. Um, yeah, so what are the elements people think? Yeah, I think I've already seen novelty in the chat. Yeah, this is a great example of novelty. Um, yeah, so things people weren't used to seeing. Yeah, disruption. Not kind of often what you think of as typical economic disruption, but they were disrupting events. There is still economic disruption there as well. Accountability, yeah, absolutely. Any other people want to add? Um, yeah, Jazz, unless that's an old hand.
No, new hand.
Great.
Yeah, no, I think what stands out to me most is the sacrifice, the fact that kind of the lengths that people have gone to take part in this, kind of these cultural actions. And I think the whole thing you were saying before about how people kind of have to pick a side, I think this is what often gets people on board in kind of civil disobedience, seeing these kind of quite kind of novel, like extreme actions, and it's like, wow, okay, these are the lengths that people are going to, and like I need to join in with this resistance because I think it just demonstrates how kind of the lengths that people are going to shows how kind of immediate kind of the kind of threats of whatever you're kind of campaigning for is. So yeah, so I think like sacrifice and like vulnerability, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really, really good point. And with this specific example as well, I want to expand on the logic of these. So this is kind of what we would very classically describe as the cultural action. So you are disrupting a cultural event or institution or object, cultural artifact, whatever. And they are very controversial, and often the logic behind them isn't really understood. Um, so a cultural action does not need to actually be in any way related to the thing that you are protesting, that you are about. The point of them is just to get noticed, and they often do this by being new or being unusual. And often the response you might hear if people don't agree is that it's not related, they don't agree with the methods. But the point of these is that our campaigns often, we don't actually have access to mainstream media, to mainstream narrative. So the messages that we're speaking about, the truths that we have to get out into the world is our responsibility. They're not being reported on. The media doesn't want to speak about it. Politicians aren't telling the truth. And they won't on a normal day invite us invite us onto news shows, whatever, to speak about the truth as what is happening. So we do this by creating controversy, by creating a drama that they do want to report on, that does make news, so that through that, we kind of inadvertently work our way into mainstream media. And that is the way which we kind of get a backhanded way to kind of force our message into public narrative, into mainstream debates, because we know that the press is controlled by right-wing elite who, under ordinary circumstances, don't want to listen to the things we have to say. But when we do these kind of actions, it hugely raises public awareness, even if it doesn't just, even it doesn't always cause massive public support for the actual methods that we're using or for the campaign. Um, it yeah, it forces people to pick a side on the actual issue, and it can be hugely powerful on the what we call like the radical flank effect. So there are studies that show that like Just Oil's actions, even for people who don't necessarily agree with Just Oil itself and the methods, it actually increased support for groups that were campaigning for the same demand but with different tactics, which is still super, super important, right? If we can shift the national narrative around things like climate breakdown, around like an arms embargo on Israel, then that's really powerful work, even if the campaign itself, even if it's turning some people away from that. But these actions do also hugely cause a boost in mobilization and people who do want to join the campaign, and also in fundraising, which again is like incredibly important, being able to run an effective national campaign that has resources. Um, yeah, so that's kind of all part of the logic behind what can be slightly confusing, confusing logic behind these cultural actions where the target isn't actually related to the demand. Um, I'll pass back over to Paul for the next example.
Thanks, Olive. Yeah, the next example is a campaign I was involved in. It's Insulate Britain. So in 2021, the Insulate Britain campaign started blocking the M25. The idea was, the overall campaign idea was to do that to an extent that they had to jail people. And it was the idea to get large numbers of people volunteering voluntarily risking prison and being thrown in prison, basically, um, just before the COP conference in Glasgow. So yeah, what sort of elements of that? Yeah, mega disrupting. Yeah, it certainly was. Um, it was at the start, at least. Towards the end, they had so actually it was very disruptive to the police towards the end because they had to have police on every single roundabout of the M25 at one point. So it did disrupt them. Yeah, sacrifice certainly. Although they didn't throw most people in prison, the private injunctions that were brought out on people gave them huge amount of fines, and some people did go to prison for that. And it had a bit of a backfire effect as well. When people did go to prison, like 6 people went to prison for the injunction, and then the weekend after that, 100 people came and sat down on Westminster Bridge in solidarity with those people going to prison. So it's a good example of sacrifice. Yeah, certainly accountability. Everyone was certainly accountable. And I'm not sure it's a great example of escalation because although the tactics tried to escalate, there were actually a decrease in numbers in a way. But there was the interesting thing about it is the escalation was perhaps in the media. The media weren't that interested with just one roadblock. Once it went on over the 6 week period that it lasted, the escalation in media attention was huge, which wasn't an escalation. It wasn't an escalation in the number of people doing it. It was just the same people doing it. I was arrested 15 times for Insulate Britain, so it was like you can't get away with that now, by the way. 15 times they wouldn't allow you to be to take action 15 times these days, I don't think. But yeah, it ticks a lot of the boxes as well. Um, yeah, and it certainly brought new people into the movement. Molly. Okay, yeah, Olive, what's your next example? Oh, wait a minute. There's a section I'm supposed to write about. I was supposed to speak something about. Sorry. Um, yeah, one slightly controversial thing about Insulate Britain and other similar campaigns like that is why the public disrupted. So I just want to talk a little bit about why public disruption is important in various campaigns. It's first important to note that the public are not the target of the action. People often say, why are you targeting the public? The public are not the target. They're just kind of caught in the middle between the state and the activists. But besides that, public disruption is a very long-standing civil disobedience tactic used by a lot of campaigns. The first Palestinian Intifada used public disruption, and in Serbia right now they blocked a massive bridge to stop a mine. But yeah, there's lots of things have used public disruption in their campaigns. And one of the things it does, similar to a cultural action in a way, it really draws attention to something because press is interested in conflict. It's a classic phrase within the newspaper industry, if it bleeds, it leads. They like violence in the press. We don't do violence, but what we can do is create conflict, non-violent, peaceful conflict. And blocking people on their journeys can do that. Whereas other tactics that target specific industries often don't have that level of conflict. We don't want that conflict. That conflict is created by the anger of the person we're blocking, but we have to create that disruption to get that conflict in the media. And attention in the press is essential to win because I think we've kind of understand that now. We sort of Olive's talked about that with the cultural actions as well. Sustained public disruption puts the state in a dilemma situation. Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me? Yeah,
Yeah,
you can hear me
can hear
again.
you.
Okay. Sorry about that. It's just, yeah, I don't know what's going on with my internet today. Not ideal. Um, but yeah, I was just saying sustained public disruption puts the state in a dilemma where they have to stop the disruption one way or another. And that can either be by jailing the activists, as we wanted in Insulate Britain, and as they did eventually, or giving in to their demand. So they really, in Insulate Britain in particular, they really, really wanted to stop this because it was really making them look bad, that they couldn't stop this disruption. And another reason they have to stop it is because it also causes wide press economic pressure, clogging the roads, costing the police lots more money, and things like swarms and roadblocks. They can kind of pop up anywhere. So many location options that it makes it quite hard for the police to be on top of it. Taking part in it, it may not necessarily feel like the best thing to do, but at the end of the day, it's effective, and there's really no time to waste on doing things that are less effective. Yes, it can make people angry, but really that anger should be at the government who aren't doing the things that that they should be doing, and make the activists stand up against them. So at the end of the day, it's what we have to do, because it's effective. And um, yeah. Okay, on to Olive, and you see the image for it already. Maybe you know what it is already.
Yeah, there was a little spoiler for you there. But yeah, our last example, very famous one, is the Freedom Riders. So in 1961, activists, black and white activists, rode together on racially segregated buses in southern US. And they faced like horrific assault and harassment because of this, and were almost killed. But it actually grew into a months-long campaign with more and more people joining, despite the violence that they received. And eventually, it forced the federal government to concede to their demands. So, yeah, what principles are people seeing in this? Yeah, escalation, absolutely. Like there was a huge jump in numbers. Sacrifice, yeah, disruption. They weren't actually causing much sort of material disruption, but the kind of backlash, the response to it, yeah, did cause huge disruption. Yeah, embodying the world we want to see. This is like a super direct way of doing this. Yeah, disrupting the white public. I think there's absolutely that psychological element of the disruption that I spoke about. It's a really important one to keep in mind. So glad someone pointed that out. Yeah, I suppose there is an element of novelty. It's a very simple design, but yeah, not something that people had seen happen yet. And it was accountable as well. You know, people could see the human beings going there and doing it. Yeah, and obviously sacrifice. People were almost killed doing this, and they committed to it and kept going. This immense sacrifice. Um, okay, that was our last example. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully, that was useful to kind of bring to light the theory that we're talking about here and how it works in practice. And yeah, this isn't something new either. You know, we are really kind of there's a huge tradition of all of this, and so much history to learn from and to take inspiration from, and see that these tactics have been incredibly successful, even though obviously the government wouldn't want us to think so, to know this kind of thing, the power of this kind of thing. But I think it's also worth bearing in mind that the people who took part in these nonviolent actions in the past, they never knew if they would win. They never knew if this was going to be successful. And often they took part because they knew that it was the right thing to do. Strategically, morally, we have to be in resistance against unjust laws, about unjust regimes. And also that a lot of these groups were hated at the time and received massive backlash, and didn't initially have public support. But it's easy looking back now to think that, you know, everyone would have loved and adored them, but that wasn't the way it was. Yeah, and it's the same here that we need to be taking action in part because our courage then breeds more courage, and people are often inspired just by seeing that there are people out there fighting back, taking radical action. Um, and our work now is getting out there and showing the world that people are willing to take a stand. Um, and it's also about the cultural ripples that you create when you stand up against injustice, when you build a radical, resistant, non-violent movement, which will continue to spur people into action later down the line, um, even if you're not seeing those immediate results. You know, it's also about long-term cultural shift that we're working on as well, um, and working towards a revolutionary moment. We know that we need to be well organized. We need to have experienced people and groups who have already been showing the courage to take a stand against the state. We can't just wait for this moment to arrive. We have to start working from now. And action is also about that culture, and it's about, you know, a declaration of our humanity, of saying that we know we can, you know, we can win this fight, and build something better, um, that we're able to have that kind of radical imagination as well of what is possible to win. Um, yeah, so hopefully those examples were inspiring for people. We are now going to go into a hypothetical planning exercise, and put all these different elements together ourselves in designing something. I'll pass over to Paul to explain.
Yes, thanks. So we've heard what direct action is, we've heard why we do it, and now we get into the how. Obviously, it's not going to be a detailed list of instructions on how you do it, how you set up a direct action. That's really not what this session is about. This is just to give you a little taster of what it might be to, if you were an action planner, and what kind of things you might want to think about. So we're going to do a little practical exercise with you. You're going to be put into breakout groups in a bit, and you'll be given the same briefing. And it's up to your team in the breakout room to decide what to do and how to do it. It'll almost certainly work better if you're on a laptop. It might be, there's going to be a map shared into the breakout rooms, and you might struggle to see it if you're on a phone. So you have to hope that at least a couple of people in your breakout rooms are on a laptop and can see it. But here's the scenario you're facing. It's a very serious matter. Pencils. There will be a national pencil convention held in a few weeks' time. Since we all know how dangerous pencils can be, we need to take a stand. So the parameters of action are, a conference is happening at this particular venue on Friday the 1st of August and Saturday the 2nd of August between 9 and 5, 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. That's how long the conference is. People will be arriving at the conference from 8 a.m. with cars, in cars. There will be an extra award ceremony for the best pencil salesman on Saturday, the 2nd of all, on the Saturday at 7 p.m. And the location for this is the Pencil Factory in Kendal, or it might be Keswick, actually, I'm not sure. But yeah, you will be shared a map of the location. And also the breakout room facilitators have this information with them as well. So if you have any questions about this or need to repeat any of this brief, then they can do that for you. So there's 80 participants at this pencil conference, and 80 VIPPs, very important pencil people. In terms of your crew, you have 100 people interested in taking part in this action. That's a huge number of people, more than the actual participants in the thing. It's a bit unusual, but pencils are so bad. You've got so many people interested in this. Let's assume that, like, most of them are up for taking pretty much anything, any non-violent action you want them to. You have accommodation for your people already sorted. You've got access to vans and cars and drivers, and you have some money for kit. In terms of messaging, your media team has all the messaging sorted. And luckily, the convention is so big and important, the press will be there already. But how big a story it becomes depends on what you decide to do. So now we want you to, once you go into your breakout rooms, a quick plan of an action. You're going to be in there for 15 minutes, and we want you to answer some key questions. What's your overall action plan? What's your action design? What sort of things might you need to consider, like transport, training, safety, equipment? Just have a discussion on the kind of logistics that you need to with doing an action like this. And we want someone to take notes and come back and try and answer these 3 key questions. What's your action design? Which of the action elements does it feature? And why do you think this is the most effective action you can do against this Pencil conference?